this is not AI. If you're a video editor and you're wondering which GPU is best for you, I've got some good news for you because I've spent the last couple of months benchmarking GPUs like crazy. The best and most expensive GPU is not necessarily the best for you. This is the ultimate guide for 2026, and these aren't even all the GPUs that I've tested. It's time your CPU is not the bottleneck anymore. MSI Radeon A18HX featuring the AMD Ryzen 9 9955HX 3D processor with 16 performance cores and 144 megabytes of second-gen AMD 3D V-Cache technology. Not just the world's fastest mobile gaming processor, but also a great workhorse for creators. It's for those with extreme performance needs and no compromises. MSI Overboost Ultra technology delivering 175 watts of graphics power to the RTX 5090 plus additional 85 watts to the AMD Ryzen 9 9955HX 3D processor. That's a 260 watt total portable power, and the CPU allows full overclocking for the enthusiasts. Plenty of I/O including 2 USB 4 ports, full-size SD card reader, and an RJ45 port. 18-inch mini LED 4K display with 120Hz and display HDR 1000. Gen 5 NVMe with a dedicated heat pipe for cooling. Whether gaming, creating, or AI workloads, it delivers in all fronts. Check out more information in the description below, as well as our full video on this laptop. Thanks AMD and MSI for sponsoring this part of the video. Media engines inside these GPUs. This is something that you don't see gamers talk about or in the gaming reviews, but media engines for creators, arguably one of the most important things that you can actually come across. And why is that? Well, the media engines are different from any other part of the GPU. You've got some like RT cores, you've got some CUDA cores, or other shader units, what AMD calls. And then there's media engines. They're probably the smallest part in the GPU, but those media engines give you hardware acceleration playback on certain video codecs. And they're completely different from NVIDIA to AMD to Intel, and different generations of GPUs will have different encoders, and they make a huge difference. This is where the 50 series made the biggest leap for video editors, because if you look at the 3D rendering performance, spoiler alert, that's coming out, there's not that much of a difference between 50 and 40 series, but in video editing, certain workflows, huge difference. So then, talking about these AMD media engines, apparently those 9000 series have 2 media engines inside. In terms of codec support, it's actually quite poor. They don't support 10-bit Photo 2 like we can see on NVIDIA or Intel media engines, so that's not so impressive. But at the same time, H.264 codec playback or long GOP actual encoding, they are very, very fast. But there's a little bit of an asterisk where we have to talk about encoding quality. Now, you might be hearing me talk about encoding and decoding. If you're new here, let me explain what that means. Encoding means putting video together. So let's say you've got your video timeline and then you want to export it out. That means now you're encoding video. You're putting the video, making it into a different format. Decoding video, like decoding or decrypting, algorithm, you have to decode or playing that video back because the video has been recorded with certain compression rate and certain file, but now you have to decode that what's been written, and then that's video playback decoding. Very, very different, and different media engines support different things. For you as a video editor, there's a huge difference between a timeline playback and exporting video. So sometimes if someone just shows you benchmark of, yeah, this exports video faster than the other one, that is not really the full actual performance review of what this codec can do, because I would argue that timeline playback is a lot more important than actual exporting speed. Because if you're editing on the timeline, you need it to be snappy, you want it to be fast when you're working with it, because you can actually go and make a cup of coffee or tea when you're exporting the video, whereas you can't do that when you're editing the video. So very different and very important depending on your workflow. So there's hardware and software playback. When the hardware on the GPU media engines can play back the codec, whether encoding or decoding, that's what we call hardware acceleration. There's special hardware inside those devices that can accelerate it and make it very, very fast. If it's software playback, what happens then with the coding or exporting, for example, or playback, is now your CPU cores, the cores that calculate everything else in your PC, they will take over and they try to play back this footage. Now, if you're an AMD Threadripper, for example, try playing back H.265 10-bit 422 footage, press play, and then you'll see all of your cores suddenly pump up, and then it's just horrendous. Sometimes the RTX 5050 that's over here, that can play back footage a lot faster than AMD 96-core Threadripper, just because it's got hardware, little tiny thing that only takes a couple of watts, compared to hard Threadripper that pulls 350 watts, is not going to do as good of a job as this 5050. That's the magic of having hardware accelerated playback. But it depends which codec you're using, because not every single codec is hardware accelerated. There's a huge codec difference between different codec and what you're using. If you're using Blackmagic RAW cinema cameras, Red RAW, Sony RAW, H.264 and 5 codecs, there's a huge difference. Or ProRes, actually, there's different codecs. But very importantly, what you need to know is that the codec has a much bigger impact on performance than the resolution. Sometimes people say, yeah, it can play back or edit 8K footage. And I would argue, I can give you 1080p footage that it would struggle, but then 8K footage that would be very, very smooth, just because you've got hardware acceleration for that specific codec. So codec is more important than resolution, and not everything is hardware accelerated. Now moving on to Davinci Resolve, and here's where we see a huge difference and we can really take utilization of all of the 50 series. So Davinci Resolve has done the best in terms of utilizing this, and we really see all of the cards shine as well as possible. In fact, AMD is doing very, very well for Davinci Resolve. So if you're editing in Davinci Resolve, there is not that bad news what we saw from Adobe before. Obviously, the best card again is the 5090, which is performing very, very well. And between 5090 and 5080, there is roughly around 11% difference. So quite a big jump for 5090, more VRAM, much more powerful, very, very good. And you can see that in the AI scores in there, for example. You can also here see how good the long GOP score is for the 50 series. We're really seeing a boost in there compared to the 40 series, which we can see over there. We're getting almost double the long GOP scores, and that's really the benefit of the new encoders and media engines inside the 50 series. Very, very impressive there. But now, at the same time, what you can see in there is the Asus Radeon Pro R9700, and the long GOP score also very, very impressive. And so is the 9070 XT. As you can see, the new media engines on the AMD cards are doing very, very well. Only 25% lower than the 5090, the AMD Pro card, but less than half of the price. So perhaps if you're wanting to do any editing in there and wanting to save, then the AMD cards are actually not doing that bad at all. Very, very impressive. Depending obviously what you're doing, but for example, RAW is a lot better on the 50 series compared to the AMD series, 5070 performing roughly about the same as the AMD Radeon. But you can see that if you're doing any AI like mask detection or subject detection or tracking on Davinci Resolve, you can see how the NVIDIA cards are quite a bit better than the best of AMD is pretty much halfway down. 4090 and 5090, very, very similar performance actually in terms of AI. But going from 4090 to 5090, the overall score is only about 18% slower on the 4090. So depending where you can get the card and what you can get, if you're not doing long GOP scores, I would probably recommend going with 40 series, but if you're doing H.264 and 5, the 50 series really gives you a boost in there. And you can see how these 50 series have a huge jump in this point in standard and extended overall scores, which is pretty insane. Now, here you can see that the AMD cards are very competitive. The 9070 XT, 9070, and then even the Pro cards there, all of this here is AMD. The sad bit is that they're kind of performing very, very similar. That being said, the 9070 XT is actually better than the 1490 according to my testing, which is quite impressive for Davinci Resolve. Now, since the 30 series, we've seen quite a big jump, and then Intel is not very impressive in Davinci Resolve, just probably not utilized, even though it does have large amounts of VRAM. Regardless, I think AMD is not bad. Ultimate cards, obviously from NVIDIA. And then on the budget and lower end, perhaps even going with the Sapphire 9060 XT, which is not performing that bad in there. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is VRAM capacity. How much VRAM do you need as a video editor? Here's my guide, what I would say. 8 GB for basic 4K editing and 1080p. If you're going more complex 4K and starting to do some multicam editing, for example, then 12 GB. If you go in 4K complex editing, I would say 16 GB plus, and then if there's 4K multicam editing, 16 GB plus. If you're doing multiple 4Ks, complex 4K, 6K and above, I would say 24 GB and above. Just for reference, what we're doing here is Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, 6K in there, 4K from Sony, 4K over there. So 3 cameras in multicam, we're editing, that's like the main timeline, plus B-roll on top, plus FFX, plus other things on top. We can see 20, 21 GB of VRAM sometimes used. So hopefully that puts you in the perspective. But at the same time, maybe if you're doing wedding editing or event editing, it's not very likely that you have multiple cameras on top of each other. There's single cameras playing it back. You just swap to a different camera or cut to a different camera that's different than having this type of editing what we have here. So if it's 6K and above, I would say that you're kind of locked now to the 4090 or 5090, the 90 series cards to get more VRAM. Congratulations! If you've reached this part of the video, you're in the top 13% of people's attention graph. And there's more than 50% chance that you seeing this means you're not subscribed. So consider subscribing, hitting that bell icon, liking the video. It would mean a world to us. If you'd like to get detailed access to our internal benchmark database of CPUs, GPUs, SSDs, and so on for creators, then may I invite you to sign up to our newsletter where we send out relevant information a couple of times a month when there is information. I'm not interested in flooding your inbox. This is when there is good information to share for your creative workflow, then we'll send those emails out. And also you'll get the most exclusive access to some of the behind the scenes, perhaps even giveaways. So scan that QR code or link in the description below. If you've got any urgent questions to me personally, you can always reach out on Minect. I'll always get back to my messages. If you're looking for a new hoodie, may I recommend this one. This is not just any cheap random hoodie. This is a high quality hoodie that you can get. And when purchasing this, we get a small little kickback to help us build what we're building here. My passion is to help creators choose the best tech for their workflow and help them save some money in the process. This is Tech Notice, and if you've reached this part of the video, you have been upgraded to the top 5% of the people who ever see this part. And now YouTube thinks that you'll like this video, and if you haven't subscribed, you can do it on this side. Thanks very much guys for watching. See you soon. Bye-bye.